To understand Trump's support, we must understand and think in terms of multiracial whiteness, according to the Washington Post. This is possibly my favourite article of all time, ever. I don't think anyone has ever managed to wrap themselves around so fully in doublethink that the horseshoe has come back to touch in quite such a way. I love this. We've read through this and we're just going to talk about some of the things. But let's talk about first the picture they've got here, right? I love this. This is Enrique Tarrio, the chairman of the Proud Boys, who's wearing, as you can see, is not white, which is not something I would care about normally, but that seems to be the focus of the Washington Post's racial activism. But he's wearing a t-shirt that just says American supremacist. I guess that begs the question, what race are Americans?
Any race.
Exactly. They're not a race. It is a culture, a people, an ethnicity, an ideology. It's not a race, though. It's nothing to do with genetics, which presumably is what Enrique Tarrio's position is. Now, I don't really know much about him. I don't think I've seen any of his speeches or anything that he's written or anything like that. I've just seen what the media have told me. But, I mean, he looks like an unlikely white supremacist to me.
It'd be pretty strong in the doublethink sense if a Afro-Caribbean gentleman was to be a leader of the new Ku Klux Klan, the Proud Boys.
Well, I mean, at least they
wouldn't make sense, would
they
it?
can't complain about a lack of inclusion and diversity, at least, can they? But anyway, so the article begins like this. The Trump administration's anti-immigration, anti-civil rights stance has made it easy to classify the president's loyalists as a homogenous mob of white nationalists. But take a look at the FBI's posters showing what people wanted in the insurrectionist assault in the US Capitol. Among the many white faces are a few that are clearly Latino or African American. Such diversity highlights the fact that President Trump's share of Latino vote in November actually rose over 2016, notwithstanding years of incendiary rhetoric targeting Mexicans and Latino communities. I just want to say, I don't agree. I don't agree that Trump had incendiary rhetoric targeting Mexican and Latino communities. He was targeting specifically illegal immigration.
I love the framing here, though, which is we believe that the Trump movement is white supremacist. That's the first part.
Yeah.
But the evidence does not say that.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do about it? That's essentially those two paragraphs in a couple of lines.
Yeah, they actually have to try and think their way out of the knot that they've got themselves into.
How is reality wrong?
Yeah, empirical,
And we are right.
Empirical evidence suggests that we're wrong. This is why we're not. Yes, Trump voters and his mob are disproportionately white. Is it disproportionate, though?
I don't think there's any evidence.
Yeah, I would have to see. Because, I mean, like, if America's 70% white European, and I'd like to see the breakdown of Trump's support, I suppose. But one of the more unsettling exit poll data points of the 2020 election is that a quarter to a third of Latino voters voted to re-elect Trump. So why is the white supremacy so diverse? I mean, the answer, of course, is that white supremacy is a total misnomer for Trump and his movement. It was not predicated on race at all.
And she admits this herself, which is why she has to redefine the whole movement as multiracial whiteness, which is not the same as white supremacy, you'll notice.
Absolutely. And you'll notice that none of the people in Trump's camp use the term whiteness or white to describe themselves or the movement. Right? They call themselves Americans, they call themselves patriots, they call themselves constitutionalists, Republicans, but they don't call themselves white or whiteness as a capital W white, as in a proper noun political movement. And they don't suggest that whiteness is the thing they're trying to uphold. So anyway, early on January the 6th, the Post's Kate Woodson saw signs of violence to come hours before thousands of Trump loyalists besieged the Capitol. I don't agree with that characterization, but we'll carry on. And while the vast majority of Latinos and an overwhelming majority of African-American voters supported the Biden-Harris ticket and were crucial to its success, many black and brown voters have friends and family who fervently backed the MAGA policy agenda, including its delusions and conspiracy theories. They're going to point fingers.
Yeah. Basically, again, reality shows that it's not a white supremacist movement, but some kind of ideology that's not white supremacy.
Yes.
Therefore, how do we explain what's going on?
But more importantly, it's rather ironic that the people who propagated all of the Russia hoaxes and conspiracy theories are pointing the fingers about other people having delusions and conspiracy theories.
Yeah. I mean, this is just pure part of partisan politics where my side believes in truth, your side believes in nonsense.
Yeah.
Whereas the reality is both sides usually have some truth and a lot of nonsense lying around. and then you have to point out what's not true and what's nonsense.
Totally
But
true.
she's a partisan, so she
Yep.
can't do that.
There doesn't seem to be a planned trust, and it does not look like Vladimir Putin had the ability to manipulate the US elections. One of the organizers of the Stop the Steal movement was Ali Alexander, a Trump supporter who identifies as black and Arab. The chairman of the neo-fascist Proud Boys is Enrique Tarrio, a Latino raised in Miami's Little Havana who identifies as Afro-Cuban. When he arrived in Washington for the Jan 6th March, he was allegedly arrested for burning a Black Lives Matter banner taken from a black church a month before. All that this says to me is it's probably not about race. You know, I mean, if you're an Afro-Caribbean person or Afro-Cuban, sorry, and you're in
Which
Little
race
Havana.
is he fighting for? That's the first part.
Well,
there.
I mean, this thing, mixed race people themselves would probably make unlikely racial supremacists. But again, we can see that we're not talking about racial supremacy at all, because people who flee from Cuba are not fleeing from racism, they're fleeing from socialism. And they flee to the United States and become strident Republicans, as Donald Trump was the Republican president, because of ideological distinctions. Again, we're going to pound this point into the ground, but this just is the answer to everything that she's saying in this article. What are we to make of Tarrio, and more broadly of Latino voters inspired by Trump? Race traitors? I don't know. What are they supposed to be? I don't know what these lunatics are supposed to think.
I would just call them people who agree with Trump supporters.
Conservatives.
Like, how is this
Republicans.
difficult?
I don't know. Yeah, exactly. It's not. I mean, we don't need to get some sort of arcane explanation when it's all just laid out in front, and they'll just tell you to your face what they think. And what are we to make of the unmistakably white mob violence that also includes non-white participants? Now, the reason I'm emphasizing the white there is because white is capitalized with a capital W. Again, the proper noun matters, right? Because I think it was the Associated Press put out their press guide for how to characterize black and Black Lives Matter, and capital B black is a thing, as in it is a proper noun for a political movement that is frankly a black supremacist movement. And this is why there have been memes going around where someone's posted on Twitter, Don Lemon is an openly black CNN host or something like that. It's like, nobody needs to know that he looks black. You can see that by looking at him. But when they have capital B black, what they're saying is black the political movement. And what they're trying to do here is ascribe a capital W white political movement to Donald Trump, which is why we have to explain why so many non-white people are joining it.
It's a very short way of saying white supremacists with capital W and black supremacists capital B, in my view.
That they are. I think it's a bit more complicated. I mean, I agree that that's what they're saying for the black side, but they are trying to say it's not even just white supremacist, because that conjures up images of like the KKK and like people who care about race, right? So that's talking about actual physical properties of a person. But I don't think that's what they're trying to say. I think what they're trying to do here is they're falling into the white fragility view of the world. And so if we look at the Smithsonian's graphic where it's like, here are the features of whiteness, this is what they're trying to say. So whiteness to them is also a political ideology, but it also has a racial dimension, which they can't explain. It doesn't have a racial dimension, incidentally. It's just sort of, Anglo-Saxon Protestant work ethic culture. So it's the inheritance of England that the United States has got. But anyway, this person calls the phenomenon of non-white participants in white mob violence as multiracial whiteness. Whiteness here not capitalized, incidentally. The promise that they too can lay claim to the politics of aggression, exclusion, and domination. I don't know how to put this out, but like, all politics is about the use of power, the exercise of power. And that means aggression, exclusion, and domination. I mean, you can see the way that Biden and his administration, incoming, are also using these politics. They're being very aggressive towards white supremacists and MAGA supporters. They plan to exclude them, and they plan to totally dominate them by deplatforming them in the entire media landscape. So the idea that this is something that only the opponents do and we would never do, again, it's just total nonsense. But again, this is the Washington Post. This is not like if this was just some random blogger who is on Blogspot or something, just speaking nonsense into the void, I'd ignore it. I'd be like, yeah, okay, who cares about this? But the fact that they get this kind of platform is terrifying. This is the way they actually think.
But it's also very interesting because, intersectionalists, critical race theory, this sort of groups have been going for a long time, and they've fully integrated themselves in the Democratic Party.
Totally.
And this is a good demonstration of how that ideology goes full circle from, going into absolute nonsense, realizing that their view does not represent reality, and then trying to readjust themselves back into what represents reality.
But without addressing their core principles of how they identified these things in the first place.
Anyone looking at a non-white member of a conservative movement would say, right, that's just a conservative who's non-white. The race doesn't really matter. But of course, they can only think in terms of race because that's where they've been going. It's like, right, how do we explain this then? Well, it must be multiracial whiteness then. It's like, no, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, it doesn't.
Like, if I had to define multiracial whiteness,
I would drop the word whiteness.
Well, they think the term whiteness, it's a substitute for essentially, as you pointed out, English liberalism or English culture.
Yeah.
In which case, multiracial version of that is just what America is. It's Americanism. Yeah. The idea you take these liberal principles and then anyone can integrate into it.
Yeah, and it's not just the liberal principles as well. It's the social principles that underlie it. So, you've got husband, wife, kids. The aim is to have a good career, own a house, have grandkids, work hard, you get what you earn, things like this. These cultural inheritances that the United States has, I think has been entirely to their benefit, by the way. I don't think they're racially exclusive, and I don't think they're universal to English people either. So it's like any culture, it's not exclusionary on the grounds of race. Anyone can join a culture. But anyway, before Trump, conservatives seeking to appeal to Latinos typically embraced the politics of conservative multiculturalism. Politicians such as George W. Bush reached out to Latino voters by showing a familiarity with their language and history, emphasizing the values of diversity and inclusion. Depicting Latinos as a distinct and valuable part of America's democratic mosaic, conservative multiculturalism connected Latino culture to Republican values, emphasizing conservative approaches to faith, patriotism, and the traditional family. I love the way that what they're trying to do now is essentially annex like the George W. Bush conservative to left-wing liberalism or progressivism.
The way they lay that out, I would actually agree. The idea of multiculturalism, the idea that you have multiple cultures within the same state and never the twain shall meet. They shall stay separate. The Latino community, cringe word in my view anyway, is the Spanish-speaking, essentially South American part of the United States that should not become like the rest of the country, but instead should stay separate.
That's certainly what they're asking for,
That's what they're describing Bush's policy as. And if that was his policy,
they're in favour of it,
That's definitely more leftist to me than anything conservative.
Yeah, it sounds like an old democratic policy to me.
Yes.
But that's the point, isn't it? What they're saying is basically we can own Bush-style conservatism, because it's it will make itself multicultural to appeal and adapt to the framework that we will lay out.
It agreed with the idea that we segregate these groups, which
basically,
that's your policy, lady.
Yeah, and I love the way that she lays this out. Trump, by contrast, knows nothing of the history of Latinos in the United States and rarely even pretends to find value in Latinos' distinct identities. Rather than offering his non-white voters recognition, Trump has offered them multiracial whiteness. Right. I mean, anyway.
I got to say something on that.
Okay, go on.
So it's Trump doesn't recognize that we should keep them separate, but instead thinks they should become part of the American tradition.
They should be incorporated into Americanism.
Is this bad?
I don't know.
Am I meant to oppose this?
I did. I was not in opposition to this thought. I think
the melting pot is better than segregation.
Yeah, right. That's literally what they've got to. That's actually what they've got to here, right? So, rooted in America's ugly history of white supremacy, indigenous dispossession, and anti-blackness, multiracial whiteness is an ideology invested in the unequal distribution of land, wealth, power, and privilege. So not communist, right? Okay. A form of hierarchy in which the standing of one section of the population is premised on the debasement of others. Multiracial whiteness reflects an understanding of whiteness as political color and not simply a racial identity, a discriminatory worldview in which the feelings of freedom and belonging are produced through persecution and dehumanization of others. Right, okay.
We should not skip over that first part there.
Yeah, no, we're going to go through all of this again, right? So this is a hysterical characterization of American history. Hysterical. So, to start with,
it is also the typical thing you find from leftist views of history.
Yes, and I presume that's rooted in their democratic origins, their origins in the Democrat Party. But the history of white supremacy, indigenous dispossession, anti-blackness, and all this sort of stuff. Sure, but the American Revolution knew the founders knew that would all stop. They knew that what they're doing when they create life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for each man is erasing slavery, erasing segregation. They knew that this was going to be the case. And this is why after the Civil War, the Democrats still had loads of propaganda going, well, the Republicans are the party of the Negro. And it was constantly like that. It was the first black senators and things like that were Republicans, because the Republicans were not actually invested in these ideologies of racial supremacy, and they were actually opposed to that. And it was the Democrats who were in favor of it. So it's one of those things that's like, look, I don't agree that that's a fair characterization of the right at all. And but multiracial whiteness reflects an understanding of whiteness as a political color and not simply a racial identity. Why even bring color into it? Because you've divorced this from racial identity, which is the root of the color politics. And so it's just political. It's a political ideology.
And that's laid out in that first line there. Multiracial whiteness is being invested in unequal distribution of land, wealth, power, and privilege. Right. That's just anything that isn't communism.
Yeah. But even then, communism always ends up that way anyway.
Yeah, so, but that's the ideal they have in their mind is the equal of everything else.
Yeah.
Well, why should they be invested in equal distribution of land, wealth, power, and privilege?
Yeah.
Why should anyone, unless they are a communist?
Exactly. And just for anyone who's like, well, why is communism bad? What you're saying there is that people who do no work and who don't deserve power, wealth, or land or privilege will have power, wealth, land, and privilege. And that means that people who might actually be not just undeserving, but the sort of people you don't want to have power and privilege in particular will have power and privilege. I don't want people who are irresponsible or dangerous having power and privilege, fundamentally. Like, these things should be rightfully earned. It should be a competence hierarchy. And again, that's what the conservatives are invested in. But anyway, multiracial whiteness promises Latino Trump supporters freedom from the politics of diversity and recognition. This is an amazing line that I can't believe got past the editors, right? Freedom from the politics of diversity and recognition is amazing, because what that implies is that the politics of diversity and recognition are oppressive.
They're a plantation,
basically,
in which you
yes.
are stuck if you're a non-white person.
And you've got no option to leave.
And Trump comes along with multiracial whiteness.
Yeah, and
it's like, hey, would you like to come with me?
His goddamn underground railroad to the Republican Party. Would you like to get off this plantation? I can offer you freedom from being constantly, stereotyped as being just your race.
I can make you an American, not a black man.
That's essentially the very root of it. It's like, you can become an American, and they hate it. But I love it. Freedom from the politics of diversity. Oh God, who doesn't want this? Who just wants to just be themselves?
What a great call out of the cult of diversity.
It's like to openly say that this is oppressive, basically. And this is what Kanye West was saying when he had his MAGA hat on in the Oval Office with Trump. He was like, I just want to be Kanye. I don't want to be black. I don't want to be this. I don't want to be that. I just want to be Kanye. I don't want you telling me what to do. But anyway, for voters who see the very act of acknowledging one's racial identity as itself racist, the politics of multiracial whiteness reinforces their desired approach to colorblind individualism. In the politics of multiracial whiteness, anyone can join the MAGA movement and engage in the wild freedom of unbridled rage and conspiracy theories. Yes, they can. Yes, they can. Literally, that's it. Anyone can join the MAGA movement and be free.
Just to go back a second there. The politics of multiracial whiteness reinforces their desired approach to colorblind individualism.
Yes. So not a racial movement, individualistic liberal politics.
Colorblind.
As
if that is wrong.
As if it's wrong to not be racist. And again, they see acknowledging one's racial identity itself as racist. No, that's not true. It's politicizing one's racial identity that is racist. Giving your race a capital lettered, proper noun political word. Your capital B black or your capital W white. Or you can join the MAGA movement and just be an American.
Yeah, as she says there, in the politics of multiracial whiteness, anyone can join the MAGA movement.
Yeah.
What
a bunch of Nazis.
Could you demolish the idea that he's a white supremacist or the movement is white supremacist any more than a sentence like that?
No. That is the perfect vindication from the mouth of a progressive of the MAGA movement's inclusive credentials.
And again, this is 4 or 5 times she said something which any normal person, and as I was trying to get the point that they've just come around, any normal person could just say, oh, well, they're just conservatives. Be that simple. That's how life used to be,
Yeah.
But no, because we've gone into this intersectional, quagmire, you end up having to come around and be like, oh, this is multiracial whiteness. It's just it's like a new dictionary
Yeah.
of how to describe things. Like we can't just say conservative, we have to say multiracial whiteness.
Exactly
Why?
right.
Is it to do because it's white supremacist? Obviously not, by her own standards here. She's pointing out that it's not.
She's talking about the European heritage of the United States, and that's called whiteness. And but again, that's not what this is about. That's not what MAGA was about. As she says, MAGA was about being a free American. And she goes on to lament this freedom, right? Multiracial whiteness offers citizens of every background the freedom to call Muslims terrorists, demand that undocumented immigrants be rounded up and deported, deride Black Lives Matter as a movement of thugs and criminals, and accuse Democrats of being blood-drinking pedophiles. Based.
Okay, well, if a Muslim is being a terrorist, I'm going to call him a terrorist. What's wrong with that? Whereas if the progressive has to sit there very quietly while the man grabs his rucksack and go, I'm not racist, I'm not racist.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sorry. And there have been, at the Manchester, the Manchester arena bombing, right? I read an article not long ago about a chap who was there who didn't mention that, I can't remember the guy's name. There was
a security guard, I know.
Yeah, there was a security guard, yeah. He saw him acting suspiciously, but didn't want to be accused of racism, so did nothing, right? And so it's not like this kind of politically correct fear has no consequences. We know that it does.
The grooming gang scandal in the UK.
The grooming gang scandal, yeah. It's all that sort of thing. But like the freedom to say things that she believes are not true.
Yeah, deride the Black Lives Matter movement as thugs and criminals. Well, if you keep burning things down and shooting people in the street.
Why don't we just have a look at the backgrounds of your martyrs? I mean, ooh, not a good one there. Not a good one there. Not a good one there. Oh my God, that's a terrible one. Sexually assaulting a woman. Jesus.
Raped a woman with his hand.
Yeah.
Pregnant woman put a gun to the belly and
yeah, exactly. The leaders and the martyrs of Black Lives Matter don't seem to be anything to be crowing about.
And then the final thing there, the freedom to accuse Democrats of being blood-drinking pedophiles. I will say nothing more, and we will move on.
Just asking, who's been to Little St. James? Like, what were the political affiliations of those people? Just curious. Just might be worth tallying that up.
Who's flown on Epstein's jet? Who's more associated with him? Is it Bill Clinton or Donald Trump?
Who went on there 26 times? Donald Trump never flew on the Lolita Express.
And explicitly called out Jeffrey Epstein on national television, saying he's a wrong one.
Yes, he did. But Bill Clinton, nothing to worry about. But the point is, let's assume that just what she's saying there, everything there that the MAGA folks are saying is false, right? Let's just assume for the sake of argument, that's all false. Multiracial whiteness offers citizens of every background the freedom to do this. Yes, that's the point. In America, you are meant to be a free man. That's the point. That's what Trump is offering, is personal freedom. You may say things that are wrong, you may say things that are offensive, but the point is you will be free and you won't be judged because of your race by doing it. This is a great advert, frankly. I wish they'd written this earlier. But anyway, here, the politics of exclusion and violence and demonization are available to all. Oh, yeah. Whereas with the Democrats, they're just available to a very small selection of elite people in Washington. If you want to speak Spanish and celebrate a quinceañera with your family, go ahead. If you want to be a proud boy, be a proud boy. Trump doesn't care. As long as you love him, he'll love you. That sounds really inclusive. If you be pro-America, you're in.
What would you expect an American conservative movement to look like?
Yeah, but that means that basically the only people who are left out are communists. And judging from this, we can guess that she is a communist. So it's like, okay, well, sucks to be communists, but get out. But anyway, what I love this as well is like this, like it's not like there aren't aggression, demonization, and exclusion in the left-wing movements. Try going to a left-wing space and misgendering a trans person. See how quickly you're aggressed upon, demonized, and excluded. It'll be instant. It'll be within seconds. You will have your life destroyed. And Trump's not going to do that. The MAGA movement isn't going to do that.
Yeah, you can come into the MAGA movement, start spouting nonsense conspiracy theory, and we'll just laugh along with you and say, yeah, that's nonsense. We don't believe that. That's it.
Yeah, totally.
Like you won't be kicked out for it unless you actually do something wrong. That's the thing. Like you're allowed to be wrong.
Yes, yeah, that's the point. You are allowed to be wrong. Freedom to be wrong. Freedom from the plantation. Anyway, America's racial divide is not simply between whites and non-whites. Thinking in terms of multiracial whiteness helps us recognize that much of today's political rift is a division between those who are drawn to and remain invested in the politics of whiteness and those who seek something better. Right, so America's racial divide is within the races themselves.
which is so absurd. But she's getting at the
She can't help it though.
the point there. It's not between whites and non-whites. Well, if the
It's
racial
between
divide,
whites and whites and non-whites and non-whites.
but if the racial divide is not between races, but instead between terms of thinking, it's not a racial divide, love.
No, it's not. But she can't not frame it in terms of being a racial divide. She can't do it.
So this is what I mean by them making a new dictionary definition for everything, so they can try and re-explain everything in terms of race, when it obviously doesn't fit.
And again, when she says the politics of whiteness, that's not even a racial statement, really, in the way that she means it. She doesn't actually mean whiteness is for every white person. There are lots of white people who reject whiteness. But the point is, she's saying the people who are invested in sort of Americanism and those who seek something better, as in communists who want to try and enact a communist utopia. We witnessed this very divide in Georgia, where a segment of white voters broke with Georgia's white majority, joining, again, capital white, capital W, joining a multiracial coalition that sent Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff to the US Senate. Gotta love those F curves, don't you? Following the leadership of black women whose organizing made that electoral victory possible. Yeah, sure they did. Was it
because they were black?
No, it's
because they're good campaigners.
Oh yes, because they're excellent campaigners. So excellent that the F curve never lies. This is the hopeful side of the shifting and diverging politics of whiteness. In the post-Trump era, the challenge will be to prevail over the extremism of Trump's capital white majority while trying to prevent the politics of whiteness from becoming an increasingly multiracial affair. Oh dear, is the politics of whiteness is going to become a multiracial affair, and that will seem more appealing than the politics of shut your mouth and know your place.
Isn't that interesting, though? The challenge for the left wing of America, the Democrats, will be in trying to prevent the politics of whiteness from becoming increasingly multiracial.
Yeah, we don't want...
We need to keep you segregated and not able to get away from the politics of diversity.
Exactly. We don't want you to have freedom from the politics of diversity, because then you might join the opponents because they're white supremacists. Doesn't make any sense. I love that they have to admit it.
This is the best example I've ever seen in which they are just accepting that, yes, we are oppressive. We are, just flat out wrong with, our view does not coincide with reality.
Yeah, it doesn't map to reality.
And we're not able to explain anything when you think like us. So we're going to have to make up a whole new term for liberalism.
Yeah.
And therefore, then we can explain everything.
Yeah. And we can't explain why non-white people would be attracted to whiteness. Whiteness can become multiracial.
Why would non-white people be attracted to any ideology other than our own?
Yeah, yeah. What's in it for them?
Because they are people.
Yeah, and they want to be free. More importantly, especially the Cubans who fled from Cuba want to be free. They know what your politics are. But yeah, so I love it. I love everything about this article, and I'm so glad that the Washington Post posted it. Like you say, I think this is just the best example of how essentially they're admitting that their ideology doesn't represent reality, and they can't explain why the multiracial white supremacy is so appealing.